The Blue Jackets had a pretty solid 2024 draft, but what does their prospect pool look like in general? We've got Sebastian High of Locked On NHL Prospect to come and talk about that on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jacket, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets continues to be free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I also want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up every customer with a boost or a bonus every single day. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com/long. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Like I said at the top of the show, yesterday or Tuesday, we looked at the Blue Jackets 2024 draft. Got some video from the guys over at Locked On NHL Prospects. And we're doing kind of the same thing again today, except we're looking at the prospect pool as a whole. So Sebastian High, one half of Locked On NHL Prospects, kind of looks at the key players in the Blue Jackets prospect pool, kind of looks at what they need to add to complete a prospect pool. But, you know, spoiler alert, it is 95% complete at this point. So I'm just going to play the clip from Sebastian, and then we'll talk a little about it in just a minute.
Alrighty, let's delve into this prospect pool as a whole here in the second segment, because there's so much to be excited for if you are a Columbus Blue Jackets fan. Obviously, there's already quite a few high-end players that are in the NHL ranks that aren't going to be included in this breakdown, whether it be Adam Fantilli, Kent Johnson, or David Jiricek, right? There's so many high-end talents that have already made that leap to the NHL level. But let's dig into the guys that haven't made that leap, at least full-time just yet. Starting off, obviously, Caden Lindstrom, another foundational core piece for this franchise moving forward that is a type of player that you want to and can build around. I'm very excited to see how he fits into that long-term lineup, whether it be as a first-line winger or a second-line center slotting in behind Adam Fantilli. If that is your 1A, 1B punch long-term, I think that you're in great shape. But I also think they could do some real damage together. So it'll be interesting to see what Columbus does on that front. Gavin Brindley hopefully is going to be making his jump to full-time NHL minutes this season, because this is one of my favorite players. The combination of motor and intelligence and offensive skill, whether it be in the goal scoring or playmaking departments, playing with high pace under heavy pressure, being able to out-leverage opponents that are far bigger and stronger than him, and finding the really dangerous spots in soft ice in the offensive zone, getting involved in the buildup on the rush, getting involved offensively, and really leveraging his intensity and intelligence to provide a ton of defensive pressure to support his defenders. And to get that from a winger especially is especially valuable. So he's one of my favorite players. I'm really curious to see what he's able to do with NHL minutes, especially if they're able to foster that continued chemistry between him and Fantilli. And I am very excited to see what the future has in store for this player. Luca Pinelli is another guy that I've been a massive fan of for quite a few years now. I watched his first ever OHL game live, and I tracked his entire development with the Ottawa 67s in the OHL. He scored 50 goals last season, really took the mantle as the guy in Ottawa in the OHL, and was their primary creative driver. He's a really intelligent play builder. He has a decent amount of skill on him. He's a solid goal scorer. I think the playmaking game also has room to grow when he's in a system and on a team where he has high-end goal scorers to pass to that he can trust to put the puck in the back of the net, which hasn't really been the case with the 67s in recent times. And his combination of intelligence, defensive commitment, and goal scoring ability is a really, really fun one. He's also really pesky and intense, and kind of in that Gavin Brindley mold in some ways as well. William Whitelaw's another interesting talent at forward for Columbus. He's developing over at the University of Michigan. I'm curious to see how he'll be able to combine with a guy like Michael Haig at that level this upcoming year, especially with Matt Greden deciding to commit to the OHL rather than the NCAA route. There might be an opening for added minutes and playtime for Whitelaw to just continue to refine his game. He's incredibly dynamic and dangerous with the puck on his stick. It's a wicked shot, really pacey and quick player as well. And he's not a slam dunk NHLer, but he does have that top six boomer bust type of upside. Jordan Dumais is a player that I'm very curious as to continue to see at the professional level. He's so intelligent. He's a fantastic playmaker from the periphery, but playing inside, getting to the middle of the ice, playing under pressure, making those decisions in split seconds under that heavy pressure is something that he'll need to build up to really solidify his NHL potential. But if he's able to make that jump, I see a play that could be a really intelligent and useful middle six piece. He's definitely undersized. He's not particularly physically engaged. The defensive engagement's also work in progress, but the raw playmaking ability is really impressive, and he'll finally be playing at a level where he'll be challenged on that front, because the QMJHL just wasn't challenging him anymore, going back to his draft year season almost. Another QMJHLer is James Malatesta, who I do think will be making the leap to the NHL this season. I'm very curious to see how that goes. This is a really intelligent and incredibly quick forward who applies a bunch of pressure, never gets his foot off the gas pedal. And while I think the offensive upside may be a little bit limited, he's a really solid two-way piece. And I think he could be slot into a bottom six role as soon as this year for Columbus. I mean, he almost cracked the roster last season at a training camp as well. And yeah, I'm curious to see what the future holds for him. Luca Del Belbaluz is another interesting player, kind of the polar opposite to James Malatesta. His speed and his feet are not the strength by any stretch of the imagination, but he's a really solid goal scorer, has a wicked shot that he can score from medium range. He uses his frame to protect possession and to get shots off from in tight. There's definitely still a lot to round out in his game, and I think a couple seasons in the AHL will do him a lot of good in refining those elements, but there's definitely a potential for like a third-line scoring centerman here who also brings a ton of size to the equation. But switching our attention to the defensive core, there's also a bunch of fun players in this regard in that Columbus Blue Jackets system, whether it be Denton Mateychuk, who just came off of a dominant season in the WHL with the Moose Jaw Warriors. The dynamic left shot defenseman is a bit undersized, but he's a really fun skater. He's constantly activating in the offensive zone. He's so aggressive offensively, and he wants to make things happen. He takes risks, but they're calculated. He gets back defensively when something goes awry. And I think that this could really be a highly entertaining top four defenseman long term. Whether he makes the NHL as of this season, I don't know, but a season in the AHL would honestly help his development as well. And if he does crack the NHL roster, then good on him, and I'm excited to see him in that role. But I think that taking a bit of a patient approach with his development would do him a lot of good. Corson Kuhlman's another player who already has been playing in the AHL with Cleveland, but he's a player that's kind of gone a bit unheralded in that Columbus system. I mean, there are so many defensemen that are trying to make their mark and crack that lineup, and I don't know if Kuhlman's will be able to do so this upcoming season, but he's a solid two-way right shot defenseman with a heavy shot and intelligent defensive habits, and I think that there is a future for him as a number 4, number 5 defenseman at the NHL level. It might just take a couple years' time to develop into that type of role. Andrew Strothman is another fun player, really dynamic offensively. He's very much like a Denton Mateychuk light. He loves to activate offensively. He takes those risks. He's not as calculated or refined in that risk taking. And I think that the tools are also a step below Mateychuk's, but if Matejček ends up being your offensive driver in a second pairing as number 3, Strasman could top out as a number 5 on a third pairing, playing a very similar role. Charlie Elick and Stanislav Svozil are 2 more solid defensemen that I think will be NHLers once they top out. Whether that be with Columbus or in a different NHL system remains to be seen, but I'm hoping Svozil can get into some consistent NHL minutes this upcoming season. He's a player I've always really had a great appreciation for, from his level of intelligence and defensive commitment to the offensive flashes. I mean, he's scored some of the more entertaining goals of the World Juniors that we've seen in recent years, with an end-to-end rush against Team Canada a couple seasons ago. And overall, a player I just have a real appreciation for. Charlie Elick, obviously, too, has that upside as a second pairing shutdown guy, and he's going to need a bit of time, but in 2 or 3 years, I think he could be a really, really valuable NHL piece already. And last but not least, the goaltender, the one notable goaltender in this category, recently drafted Evan Gardner, who we talked about in the last segment. Going to need time, obviously, but the foundation of intelligence and refined habits in net is something that clearly Columbus valued in selecting him in the second round. I think overall this prospect pool should get like an A- grade. Obviously, the grade would have been a lot higher if guys like Fantilli and Jiricek would have been included in this, but still, as it stands, it's a strong prospect pool with a lot to be hopeful for. And in terms of areas of need, more goaltenders would be a clear area that I think should get some focus in the upcoming drafts or by means of acquisition. I think that Yaroslav Askarov would be a fantastic target if you are the Columbus Blue Jackets. And also adding another top 6 forward and top 4 defensemen in terms of prospect projections in the upcoming drafts. You never have enough of those, and I think that Columbus are a couple of those away from being real, like, perennial contenders once this.
We've got more from Sebastian we've got some breakdown of what Sebastian just said coming up in just a second. But first, I've got to tell you all about Indeed, because we're all driven by the search for better. When it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. They are your matching and hiring platform. They've got over 350 million global monthly visitors, and they've got a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. So you can ditch the busy work, and you can use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging all in one go. So you can connect with candidates faster, and they don't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent survey. They leverage over 140 million qualifications and preferences every single day. So Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. So the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. And listeners of this show are going to get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/locked-on. Just go to Indeed.com/locked-on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/locked-on. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We're talking about the prospect pool today, which glowing reviews from Sebastian High over at Locked On NHL Prospect. A couple of things I wanted to dive into, specifically speaking. Some of them are positive, some of them are negatives, but as he went through and listed all of the players, I was like, man, this is a really solid prospect pool. And when you take into account the fact that Fantilli isn't included on that list, David Jiricek isn't included on that list, although I would argue that he probably should be. I don't know that I would consider him as aged out of prospect yet. I know that Locked On NHL Prospects, so Hadi, Kalakash, and Sebastian tend to take the prospect label away once they've hit 25 NHL games, which seems early to me, but hey, here we are. The first thing I wanted to talk about is kind of one of the last things that Sebastian talked about, actually, which kind of is a little bit backwards, but it's fresh in my mind. So we're going to talk about it. And that's the lack or perceived lack of goaltending talent in this prospect pool. And I thought that was a really interesting thing because Sebastian mentioned Evan Gardner, who the Blue Jackets just drafted in the second round, but didn't mention players like Jet Greaves, Melvin Strahl, Sergei Ivanov feels like the big omission to me there, considering what he did in the KHL as a 19-year-old, as I think he's 5'3", 5'10" or 5'11". You know, like he had impressive numbers last season, and I just think that they should put some respect on his name. I'm really interested to see what he does this season. He spent most of last season on loan from another team, so whether he'll get loaned back to that team, whether he'll manage to make it stick with his original team, I'm not sure. But that is definitely, when you're looking at the prospect pool, like that's definitely a name that I think is kind of an unsung hero of this prospect pool. You know, the Blue Jackets haven't had an A+ goaltending prospect in a minute, and I think Ivanov definitely has potential to be that guy. You know, it's enticing to talk about, okay, yeah, let's go and get Yaroslav Askarov, and you know, figure everything else out, you know, but I don't see that as a possibility. Maybe I'm wrong, but looking at the goaltending prospect pool, I know that Sebastian said, okay, they could use some more quality goaltenders in the pool. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think we have a handful of guys that are kind of like, there's a clear path of development, you know, like Tarasov is going to be backing up Muslykins this season. Jet Graves is going to be starting in the AHL with the potential to jump up if needed. And then after Greaves, you know, you've got guys like Ivanov, who was taken 2 drafts ago. You've got Strahl, who was taken last year. You've got Gardner, who was taken this year. You know, if one of those guys pans out into a AHL starter / NHL backup, like that to me feels, goalies are such voodoo that like if you, it's kind of just like you throw a bunch of darts and hopefully, you know, one of them hits. If one of those 3 darts hits, then I think that would be considered a success, especially like from my point of view anyway. You know, would I like a quality A++ goalie prospect in the system? Sure, but I don't know that the system is, I don't know that goaltending is a clear-cut weakness of this prospect pool, especially considering how weak it was just a couple of seasons ago. And then, you know, you picked up, you know, Jet Greaves kind of had his coming out party. Zdeno Tarasov looked solid. Ivanov looks like a great hidden gem. And not necessarily a prospect, but they picked up Zach Sorchenko in free agency, who looks to be a very solid backup for Jet Greaves at the AHL this season. I don't necessarily think I'm going to consider him as part of the prospect pool, but the goalie pipeline is looking pretty strong in Columbus, which, as someone who, you know, we love goalies on this show, we love talking about goalies on this show. It's nice to not be as worried about the goaltending in Columbus, considering the past couple of seasons. I feel like that's been the worry. Every step of the way, I'm like, man, but what about the goaltending, though? What about the goaltending, though? And I feel like they are on the right path to having a solid goalie pipeline. Like I said, interested to see Nolan Lalonde will be making the jump to the professional ranks this season. I expect he'll probably jump between the AHL and the ECHL. They have Pavel Chayan, who had a rough season last year, spent much of it in the ECHL, but he's another option at the AHL level. I'm not worried about the goaltending for the prospect pool anyway. The NHL pool, sure, maybe a little bit worried. We'll see what happens there. But as of right now, I'm not worried about. I'm not like sitting here thinking, man, the Blue Jackets really need to go out and get a goalie early in the draft next year to really kind of compete. So that's that. I was surprised that Sebastian didn't really go into detail with a lot of the goalies, but there was a lot of prospects for him to cover. You know, I think I should have counted, but I feel like there was 12 or so prospects that he covered in detail. So I can forgive him for not talking about the goalies, because, you know, you look at the prospect pool and you're like, wow, where do I even start? You know, you add Lindstrom to that, you add Charlie Ellick to that, you've got Matejchuk, Svozil, Corson Kuhlmans. Another name that didn't get mentioned was Aiden Hreshuk, who just finished his last year at Boston College, I believe. So he should be making the jump to the AHL this season. I'll be interested to see what they have in him. The defensive prospect pool is really interesting because there's a bunch of guys that you're like, that I feel like they're right on that cusp of, should they be in the NHL versus should they be in the AHL? And I feel like most of them probably could make the jump to the NHL, but it might be in their best interest to stay in the AHL. So like Svozil, I'm still really high on. I thought he had a great playoffs, especially playing with David Jiricek on that top pairing for Cleveland. Corson Ceulemans is, like Sebastian said, kind of an underrated part of the prospect pool. I think just because, unfortunately, he has kind of been leapfrogged by a handful of guys, or not necessarily leapfrogged, but he was a first-round pick in 2021, I believe, and then the next year the Blue Jackets took Jiricek and then Matejchuk. And then, they've added a couple of guys, so he's just kind of been a little bit bumped down the depth chart, which is kind of unfortunate for him. But I still think there's something there. I think, again, like Sebastian said, if they can get him into like a third pairing role, maybe get his NHL debut this season, I'm really interested to see where he goes from here. We're going to take a quick break, and then when we get back, I want to talk a little bit about the forwards that Sebastian talked about, because again, there was a lot of them, and there's a couple of things I wanted to kind of talk about in regards to the forward group of the Blue Jackets, or the Blue Jackets prospect pool. So that's coming up in just a second. First, I want to talk to you about FanDuel, because I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But playoffs have stopped. The MLB is happening, which is exciting, but there's fewer sports happening right now. They aren't sportsing like I want them to. But don't worry, because FanDuel is going to let me keep the sports going whenever I want, and they're going to do the same for you. All you got to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is going to hook up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We are talking about prospects again. It's that time of year, and we got glowing reviews from Locked On NHL Prospects in terms of the quality of the draft and the quality of the prospect pool. I want to talk about the forwards in a minute, but just to remind you, Sebastian gave this pool an A-, which when you consider that guys like Fantilli, Johnson, and Jiricek aren't included in that, I feel pretty darn good about it, if I'm being honest. But in terms of the prospects that he did mention, just so many of them. Again, I don't expect more than one, maybe two of them to have an NHL impact this season, but I could very easily see this organization is real high on James Malatesta. He's a guy that I wanted to kind of highlight specifically. Made his NHL debut in, I think, the second to last game of the regular season last year. Scored a goal in his debut, and this organization likes him a ton. I could really see him making a push to be in the bottom six of this team. The roster is kind of not wonky. That's not the word I want, but I think there's going to be some shakeups to the roster, and I think he might be making a push for someone on that fourth line's job. Obviously, Texier is gone. Alexander Nylander is gone. If we assume that Line A is gone, then that's a place in the top six that has opened up for someone to move up, like Igor Chinikov, for example, which creates a space for someone like James Malatesta. But yeah, he's a guy that I genuinely wouldn't be surprised to see, especially the presumed fourth line of Corrali, Olivier, and Danforth. They're all UFAs at the end of this season. So there's a space right there for Malatesta to jump into. I think that's really intriguing. Gavin Brindley is another name that he talks about. He's a huge Gavin Brindley fan, as am I, as is, I assume, are all of you. Could definitely make a push for the NHL this season. I don't think that there's any rush there. I'm not going to be upset if he doesn't make the team. Again, I guess it really depends on Patrick Laine and what happens there. But there is a world in which the top six of this team next season is Gaudreau, Monahan, Chinikov, Johnson, Fantilli, Brindley, and then that third line of Voronkov, Jenner, and Sillinger is really enticing, honestly. So like I said, we'll see what happens. We'll see what goes from there. Assuming that the Line A move goes through, Gavin Brindley is definitely an option for the Blue Jackets in that top 6. I think putting him with Fantilli it's easy. It's easy money, you know? If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I think they'd be fools to not at least try it based on the success that they had in that year of college. They're really close friends. Great chemistry on the ice, great chemistry off the ice. You've got to think that they at least try it. That's going to be something that I'm watching for at training camp and in the preseason is going to be what they do with Fantilli and Brindley. Obviously, there's no new coach yet. I was really hoping that there might be some news on that by today, but alas, I guess maybe next week. We'll see, or because of how this works, they'll announce it as soon as I stop recording today. But overall, I agree with Sebastian. Really, really great prospect pool. I don't necessarily agree that they are in need of another top 6 forward or another top 4 defenseman. I think it's nice to have, but I'm not looking at this and going, man, you know what they really need? I would like one more goal scoring winger. I know that it was kind of Lindstrom or Demidov at the draft. For me anyway, not necessarily for the Blue Jackets. And while Demidov would have been a great addition, I thought Lindstrom filled a bigger hole, So I'm not out here like, man, I really wish we had a goal scoring winger instead of a second potential 1C like we have in Lindstrom. But that's something that I would be focusing on if I was Don Waddell in the next draft. Depending on where the Blue Jackets finish up, I'm going to knock on wood here. I'm not expecting them to be a lottery pick necessarily. I could see them being kind of between 8 and 16 if all goes well. So I don't know that they'll get that, elite winger at that position, at that kind of draft position, but that's what I will be looking for to kind of, and that to me completes the prospect pool. But that's kind of all I've got for today. Tomorrow we will maybe have an update on the coaching. Who knows? If we do, then that'll be what the episode is about. If not, I've got one more segment from Sebastian about players that he is expecting to see big 24-25 seasons from. So we'll talk about that and which prospects are going to have breakout years for the Blue Jackets, the Monsters, or their junior/NCAA teams. So that's coming up tomorrow on Locked on Blue Jackets. Thank you for listening to today's episode, for making it your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all podcast platforms, over on YouTube and on SiriusXM. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. And thank you once again for listening. Shout out to Sebastian for helping out with the prospect analysis that we know and love. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.